in northern Colorado. Not incredibly unusual that it's very windy because we have had a record, 2020 was a record year of wind events exceeding 60 miles an hour in my area. We had 7 of them. The previous record had been 4. So this is going to be the first one of 2021. And the predictions are that we'll break that record again for numbers of exceeding 60 mile an hour events in 2021. We're in a pretty permanent weather change scenario as it relates to wind. So I only mention it for 2 reasons. One is it's howling outside, and it can be potentially disrupting to both me as I'm going to be talking and teaching here, but more importantly, if it gets loud, Mark, if you start hearing it, let me know. I'm not sure how I can totally avoid it, but I'll try. So why don't you go ahead, Mark, and start recording. We'll go ahead and start here. Hey, everybody, Wayne Dorvan and Mark here for the EAT community for our Monday night crazy Ecolonomics webinar. I don't even know what week number we're in. Mark, do you have a guess? 7 or 8, probably, maybe even more than that. 6, yeah. And we'll keep going for quite a time. We're really excited. Forget about this webinar for a minute. I'm glad all you guys are out there, and there are a bunch of you there, and I'm going to ask you to do some things here in just a minute. But I am really excited about some of the other webinars that we have coming up, including Friday, when we're going to have Jonathan Latham, Dr. Latham, on to talk about origins of the coronavirus as a scientist. Someone who will speak with a bias, because we all have biases one way or another, but he'll try to be keeping it in a science setting, and he has the credentials to back up his science mentality, and that's very cool. He's a good speaker. No, not just a good speaker, he's a great speaker. And he'll actually be spending 3 weeks on this topic. So the next 3 Fridays, we'll have Jonathan talking about this. And then following that, this is not really even his total expertise, although he is a virologist. He's going to talk about genetics, the DNA, and he could spend 10 weeks or so, not a long period of time talking about that. And then next week, and Mark will remember the date before I will, we have a really cool family, young family, 4 people. I think the kids probably won't speak. They're in their grade school years, but husband and wife who have basically escaped from a life that they didn't like, dropped all the materialistic things that they were involved in and have minimalized, and are living in a converted school bus. Actually, I'm not going to say school bus, a converted bus, because it might be a municipal bus, but I'm sure they're going to tell us more about that. And that's going to be one. And we've just got one after another, more and more exciting ones that are going to come up after that. So we're excited about that. Couple logistics for us as we get started here tonight. If you wouldn't mind, this will be a lot more fun if you guys interact with me. If I just sit here and talk, hopefully you get something out of it, but the reality is I know for a fact you'll get more out of it if you interact some yourself. And you can do that several ways. The simplest way is to just use your fingers and go to the question box that you have probably on the right side of your screen and type in some thoughts and questions. And I'll ask you some questions throughout that you might give some answers to. So here's the first one. If you're hearing me all right and seeing me on the webcam, right now it's all you should be seeing is me on the webcam, and you're hearing me fine, put some ones in that question box. Just that's the way that we indicate that you're communicating. That's the way we indicate applause or yeses. So just put some ones in. Again, I mentioned we have a windstorm going here, but I'm also on satellite internet. Because of that, I actually use a phone connection for my voice, so it's a landline, so it gives much better audio quality than if I was using my microphone that I have here. And then I'm using the webcam, and I'm going to share my screen for a number of things, and Mark's going to help me by sharing his screen for a number of things too. So please, nobody's put any ones in yet. Again, please pretend that this is live. Pretend that you're sitting right there, and I am looking right at you right now. I'm staring you right in the face, and I'm asking you, please interact with me. And at the very least, type some ones in. Secondly, if you're bold enough, tell us where you're at in the world, just generally. If it's in the United States, just kind of a state that you're at, maybe. If you're somewhere else in the world, just put Yugoslavia, New Zealand, South America, wherever. We've already got some people weighing in there. Awesome. Appreciate it. Again, we're not going to share. By the way, this is all private. Nobody else reads these answers that you're putting in. Nobody, except Mark and I. So you don't have to worry about whatever you put in. We don't share it with anybody else without your permission and so on. So anyway, so thanks for putting in, some folks putting in where you're at in the world. I see we've got some variety of places represented. The other way you can interact, if you get really bold, this happens rarely, but I would always hope that we're going to have some time when somebody will do it, is you can click on the little button that says, it shows a little hand. That means put your hand up, and we'll unmute you, and you can actually either ask questions or make comments or give some great information just by unmuting your microphone. We'll do that if you have one. But otherwise, just feel free to type in. Right now, I see we're covered coast to coast. We've got people from California, from Florida, so all very cool. So this is the first of what will be many sessions. I don't know the total number yet. I don't put constraints on us in sort of time. When we talk about a topic that, if you read the email that I sent out a couple of days ago, it's probably somewhat controversial. And I love controversy. I love being the devil's advocate, for example, and presenting a view that isn't necessarily mine, but it needs to be presented. And we need to be open-minded and be willing to think about it. So what I'm going to ask you is, if you choose to continue to attend for the next 15 or 20 weeks, we're going to stay on the same topic. And it's a very broad one, very big one. And we're going to have other experts other than myself, because I am really somewhat knowledgeable, but I don't consider myself a real expert in a number of different areas regarding this topic. So I'm going to bring in other folks, and I'm wide open to letting you guys suggest any experts that you might know of that you'd like to suggest that could also become speakers and teachers for us. So the topic, and I even really struggled with coming up with a short name for it because there could be a wide variety of ways to describe it. But I think the one that I ultimately chose, and I'm going to possibly show you some sites where it would describe what other people would define for this topic in Wikipedia or Merriam-Webster dictionary and so on. But the topic is going to be broadly preparedness. And yes, that is a word. So prepare with a D-N-E-S-S, preparedness. And again, if you look that word up in terms of a definition, you're going to find being ready for an unknown, being prepared for an unknown. Sometimes they'll go further and say, specifically even for the potential of war. Now we're not going to go there. We don't really even want to talk about that potential, but rather to be prepared for all kinds of potential things. And this, so the other word that I thought about using, which is potentially appropriate also, is survivalism, which is the ability to survive in circumstances that are not normal. And we'll interchangeably use those words throughout this whole series: preparedness and survivalism. Here's what we're not going to use. This is not what this is intended to do. The whole broadly now pretty widely heard description of prepping, which almost always has some implication of some dire world-ending or life as we know it ending circumstances involved with it. That's not what we're going to talk about here. We're not going to be specifically, and hopefully not even using that word prepping. We're not going to use survivalist. And there's a difference between survivalism, which is preparing to survive in a circumstance that you don't have control over. And yet a survivalist is generally defined like a prepper would be, which is someone who is preparing for world-changing, completely life-changing circumstances. Now, not that that's an unworthy topic, it's just not what we're going to talk about over this series. So what do I mean from a survivalism or a preparedness of just being able to deal with things you can't predict? And I would be shocked if any of you have ever not dealt with one of these kinds of circumstances. A car accident and the aftermath of it, what you might have to be doing. A power outage for any period of time more than an hour, let's say. But even for 5 minutes, I absolutely know there are a lot of people who do not have an idea of how they would warm themselves if a power outage occurred in the winter and their heat was all related to electrical, and so it's provided by that source, or that it happened at night and they needed to get some kind of light. They wouldn't know if they had any candles. They might even not know how to light a candle. They wouldn't know where they would find some kind of a tool to light a candle, even if they had a candle. They would have never practiced to doing anything of that nature. I'm going to ask Mark a question now. Mark, about how often do you have in Bangladesh? Mark is not in what we would call a just total first world situation like we have here in the U.S., which is probably where most of you are from. Because actually, most of you on here have not put where you're at, where you're from. Please put that in. Just put it in if you want, where you're at in the country or the world. How often do you have power outages? About, Mark, and what's the longest one you can remember? That's huge, Mark. That's huge, right? And tell everybody what your living situation is. What's the size of the city you live in, and what do you kind of how far are you from neighbors and all that sort of thing. You know what, Mark? While I begin to give a little more of a talk in a minute, pull up a Google Earth or some just images of your city, and we'll put them up afterwards, and we'll talk. Because tell me right now, then, about that 3-day power outage event, and tell me what you believe were the most unexpected things that you had to deal with during that, and if you remember it, how did you deal with them? You're being somewhat general, though. What about you personally, and I don't know how long ago that was, and what your family was. Right now, Mark has his wife and himself, and I think his wife's mother lives with them, and he has 2 children, one about 3 and one about 11, I believe. So this was probably a little while ago. So just tell us something you remember, not about broadly the area, but you yourself that you did to deal with that 3 days of lack of power that, you know, probably people wouldn't even think about, maybe. Did you have to treat that water at all, or had it already been treated when you brought it up to drink it and use it for food or however you used it? Just generally, right? I mean, that's just a common situation, right? Right. Right. By the way, Mark's showing some pictures of the city and was showing some overheads earlier, just so you can see how dense the population is. So let's just broaden the description a little. You said that you live in a quiet area, relatively nice. Were there people that were so unprepared that you heard about from somebody else, or you even could see it or hear it from your apartment, where there was really violence even that was happening? Right, right. So again, there's an instance of a not so developed country where Mark, if you heard him, said that, could you imagine what you'd be doing if you had power outages for about an hour every other day? I bet a number of you wouldn't even know what to do. And that's a little scary. So preparedness means to figure out how to deal with those kinds of things. In an auto accident, if you happen to be in one, and let's say you didn't get hurt, but there were 2 or 3 other people at the accident that got severely hurt, would you know what to do to help save those people's lives? Or would you do like a little story that I'm going to tell right now, which is just horrible as far as I believe, and I can't even still, till this day, believe that things kind of happened the way that they did. But I was driving back from some kind of a business meeting in the evening after dark, and I was only about a mile from my home. I lived in a rural area, and I had just passed a shopping center at the corner of a fairly major intersection in a town that we shopped in. And at that corner there were, oh, by the way, this was a time before cell phones or the internet, okay? If you weren't at a place that had a landline, you used a telephone booth to make phone calls. So anyway, I had, and beyond this shopping center were probably a couple blocks of homes, and then it became dark and rural farmland on both sides of the road. And as I came out of the lighted area of the subdivisions, driving probably 35 miles an hour, speed limit was probably 45 even, but I was going less than the speed limit. It looked to me like in the distance, there were headlights in my lane. And I don't know if you've ever had that happen, but it looks very different to you when headlights are in your lane versus when they're where they should be on the other side of the road. So immediately I started to slow down even more, and I was still probably more than a quarter of a mile from where these lights were. The closer I got, the more I realized I was right. They were in my lane. I also had already sensed by then that they were stationary, that they weren't moving. And the closer I got, and I was looking sort of to the side and couldn't see any other lights or any other signs of anything. As I got closer, and we're talking maybe 200 yards away now, an eighth of a mile, it was clear that the vehicle, with the lights on, there was a door. The driver's side door was open, and the lights inside the vehicle were on, and it looked like it was probably a pickup truck, which it turns out it was. For whatever reason, as I got even closer, and I'm slowed down to where I'm going, like 5 miles an hour now, I get about 100 feet from it, still a ways, I stopped. And I'm, by the way, looking in my rearview mirror, seeing if any people are coming. I'm looking down the road away from me to see if anybody else is coming, and there's no indication of any other vehicles or lights at this point. So I was real worried about what was going on, and I quickly got out of the vehicle, and about 20 feet in front of me, and I had not seen it. I don't know why I stopped where I did, but not very far in front of my vehicle, which was also a truck, was a person laying on the pavement. Because of the blindingness of the lights in my lane coming right at me, I had never seen that person on the ground. Normally, I think I would have pulled right up to right in front of those lights, but I didn't in this case. And I didn't run over this guy. It was a guy. And I really don't know why I didn't, but I just, for whatever reason, stopped. Anyway, as I got to him, I reached down, and he was actually starting to push himself up. And I sort of kind of pushed and said, no, you stay down, just stay there. I want to make sure you're all right. Don't try to get up too quick. I said, can you talk? And he kind of mumbled and said, is everybody else all right? Something like that. And then it hit me, I'm missing something here. And I then looked over to my left, and in the ditch in the road, almost, no, not quite straight over, but almost straight over from where they were, was a Volkswagen Bug in the ditch, upright, but literally just crushed. The whole front end of it just obliterated. And so the passenger side was facing me. And I said, you sure you're okay for just a second? And he said, yes, I'm fine. I said, don't get up, just stay there. And I went over and looked at this VW, There was nobody on the passenger's side, but it was clear there was somebody over in the driver's seat. So I went around it in the ditch and over. The windows were all broken out. The windshield was shattered, but the driver's side window was broken out. And there was a person with the steering wheel up against their chest. This is before airbags. And I mean, the first thought I had was that person was dead. And I immediately went and put my finger up against this person, it was a lady, her throat, and there was a pulse. And then I looked and I could see that she was breathing. So it was real clear. There wasn't anything else I could do right there then. So my next thought was, I've got to get help very quickly here. So about that time, I see a vehicle coming towards us in the right lane. And again, that person would have seen the taillights of the truck. I just started waving my arms. The guy had not listened to me, and he had sat up, and he was now sitting on the road, on the ground. And I said, "Stay there, please don't move." And this vehicle came, and they saw me, and they stopped as I was literally in front of them, waving. I went over to the driver's side, and I said, "There's been a horrible accident here. Would you please drive to the shopping center that's just less than a half mile in front of us there, and get on a payphone and call 911 and get somebody here to help?" And they looked at me like I was from an outer planet, an alien of some kind, and they just drove off, just sped off. And I was just thinking, oh, I hope they really listened and they're just going in a hurry to try to call somebody. Minutes went by and another vehicle came. Similar sort of circumstance. This time the guy had gotten up and I'd actually helped him back into his truck. He was bleeding a little bit, but was all right. And I had him sitting in his truck. This next vehicle came, and this guy saw me. I'm waving my arms. He saw the truck. I don't know whether he looked over and saw the car or not, and then he just sped by, wouldn't even stop. It was a guy. The first one was a lady, by the way. That was in that first vehicle. Well, then at that point, I had decided they're not stopping. I've got to go back to, by the way, the police station and fire station for the town that we were near was less than a quarter mile from that shopping center at the corner, back in the opposite direction. So if somebody would have gotten a hold of them, they would have been able to come by this time. So I went back now. I told the guy, stay there. I went back, got on a payphone, called 911, and within instance, I saw lights coming out. I was going to go. If I didn't see lights literally quickly, and if they didn't tell me that somebody would be coming right away from that fire station, I would have gone there. But instead, I saw the lights. I drove back, blocked the road so that they wouldn't run into the car that was in the ditch. The rescue people come. Anyway, bottom line, that it was so horribly embarrassing that these people, I was embarrassed for mankind, that these two people had just driven off, and literally the fire department said nobody had called them. And that was just disgusting. And anyway, after that, again, they couldn't do everything themselves, so they asked me if I could keep watch on the guy, and I helped take his pulse a little bit. And I've done some first aid and had some things when sort of really worse situations than that in terms of having to help people before. But that was just something that I kind of learned from Boy Scouts even back when I was a young kid, but then had furthered some of my knowledge on that as I got a little bit older. But the approach that those people took by just getting out of Dodge and not trying to help at all is, I'm afraid, what a lot of people would do in some kind of a panic situation. In 2015, we had a very large flood that hit the area where I live, and there was as many as 80,000 people that were isolated by water and put into an islanded area for more than a week. And they couldn't get out without fording through pretty dangerous water. There were helicopters that started to fly in and bring supplies. But this is just a fact. Anywhere in the world, in an urban environment, in any city in the world right now, the longest that place would have for food supplies, if it was isolated from any food coming in by either trucks or planes or trains, or if it was on a coast by boats, ships, is 4 days. 4 days before food would run out. And everybody, no, that's not true. What do you think would start to happen if that was true, though, 4 days later when people were running out of food? Throw something in the question area if you're willing to about that topic. Well, don't think about that as a potential. It has happened. It happened in Christchurch, New Zealand in 2010 when a 7.1 level earthquake hit the city of 450,000 and knocked everything out for a period of time. Power, water, sewer, you name it. Injured a number of people, killed a number of people. They didn't get food quickly. And in 3 to 4 days, people started to kill each other in the streets trying to get food. Not a lot, but it did happen. In 2012, in Mongolia, a similar situation occurred from a stoppage of traffic and power lines going down. And for 4 days, a fairly major city was isolated. Riots broke out. People were killing each other in the streets to get food. In that case, thousands of people were injured and killed. You can look that up. All the Christchurch situation over the Mongolia situation. So it's not completely something crazy. Essentially happened. So what if that power outage, though, just occurred to your house? Do you know where to find candles? Do you know how to treat water if you needed to? And we're going to spend the last 20 minutes or so here today talking about water specifically. And then next week, we'll go further. But how would you know how you could purify water if you needed to? You could get it to it, you could drink it. Would you know where to find the candle? Would you know how to light a fire in your fireplace if you needed heat or in something that you had? Would you know better than to turn on some kind of a propane burning device inside your home and creating carbon monoxide so you died of carbon monoxide poisoning, which has happened many times, by the way, by people. Because your house is tight enough that you shouldn't ever try to burn a fire using gas of some kind in an enclosed circumstance. There's just a whole bunch of little things that you really should get prepared for. So, again, we're going to spend pretty much the rest of today talking about water. But before that, one just broad topic. What are the basic things that you would need if you were in a situation where for 3 days, like Mark's situation you heard about, you didn't have access to power, let's say? What are the basic human needs? There's not that many of them, and by the way, it's a little controversial about how you describe it, but the very basic human needs that have to be met. Throw in the question area if you've got any answers to it. One of them is water, and water is probably the most important. How many days do you think you could live without water? If you look it up, you'll see lots of answers, but very rarely will you receive something over a week. A lot of professionals believe it's going to be 3 to 4 days that you would die without water. die without water. A lot of people believe that if you went 2 days without water, you begin hallucinating. You really wouldn't be able to function. And unless someone else was caring for you, you would ultimately die. So, even if you got water. So, water is one of those, is probably the most important basic need. Now, there is one more that you can very quickly die from. Very unlikely to occur. It would probably take one of those world-ending experiences. Although it could also occur because of one of the stupid things that I described about, let's say, doing a propane fire in a stove, something in your house. Because not only would that potentially create carbon monoxide, which could kill you, it could use up oxygen. A human being can live for about 5 minutes at the most without oxygen. 5 minutes. So if there are circumstances that use up oxygen, you could quickly die from lack of oxygen, but it's not often thought about as a need because it would take very catastrophic conditions typically to create that. The next need is probably not what you think. A lot of people would think it's food. You can actually go for as much as 3 weeks without food. And probably once you got it, at that point, you could have your food needs taken care of very quickly, within hours. More importantly, you need some kind of ability to stay warm. If you are not able to stay warm, your body temperature starts to go down. Again, you can die very quickly. Probably less than a day if you're in circumstances where your body temperature gets reduced to below your surface body temperature gets reduced to below, let's say, 20 degrees Fahrenheit. But more importantly, your core body temperature, your own body, gets below about 95 degrees for any extended period of time, meaning hours. If you're at a lower than that number, 95 degrees for hours, you have going to experience some very serious breakdowns in your bodily functions that could be fatal. So people almost always combine fire, or the ability to create heat, and shelter sort of into the same circumstance. Sorry about that. So water, shelter, or the ability to protect yourself from heat loss, so stay warm. Then you probably go to food. If this call comes in one more time, I am going to quickly answer it. See if it's anything that's really that important. I'm sure it is. I very rarely get a call on my cell phone. Okay, I am going to answer this real quick. Hello, who is this? Hello? Yeah, this is Wayne. I'm on a webinar right now, and I am running, and you tried calling them 3 times. I thought you might have left a message. I finally didn't answer it. I thought maybe it was an emergency. I didn't get a voicemail. No, anyway, I apologize. Is there something that I can help with? I don't. So. I was just calling to let you know your COVID test was negative. Well, I knew that days ago. So I appreciate it. So thank you for letting me know that. Of course. You have a good night. You too. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yes, sir. All right. Bye-bye. I had a negative COVID test. That's good news. I knew that 5 days ago, by the way. So our medical system's a little screwed in this country. Anyway, those three, water, body warmth, and food, are really important. But there's a lot of other things. And I pulled up an article earlier from a journal, the Journal of Sociology, which is not a news writing facility. It's written for sociologists. It talks about the 7 essential human needs, and it breaks them down into 2 different categories. One that's basic, and it calls them physiological needs, and that does include the things we just talked about: healthy food, water, vitamins, air. It also throws in physical activity or exercise, the biological drives for sex, and so on. So it's not just quite as a preparedness circumstance, but those are needs. And then environmental needs, which there's where the temperature side of things comes in. But it also includes protection, so against physical types of hazards, so someone assaulting you or where you live or whatever. Cognitive needs, which is how we understand ourselves related to our world, and that we need to understand that. And then emotional needs, which is that we all have needs for things like love and belonging, support and acceptance and inclusion, all those sorts of things. Psychological needs, which include self-esteem, need for freedom, need for power in some cases, esteem, and that's one that the psychologist Maslow talked a lot about. So that's a big picture one. Another one is another big picture called the need for alignment, which is how we what we deal with our inner self versus our outer self. A need for connection, so being connected to other people and other things, and the world around us. So it's really the big things, those that they're calling them. This article says the connection, alignment, and then all of the basic needs that I described. And it breaks down the basic needs more further. So now let's talk a little about water and water needs. And let's start with the real basics. If you found yourself in a situation where you had to get water, you found a source of it, you could put it in something you could get it from, let's say a bucket, a 2-liter pop bottle, you name it, lots of things. How would you know that it was safe to drink, or what could you do to it to make it safe to drink? Here's where people fall into traps sometimes, because there are a number of portable water treatment solutions now, things called the straw, there's all kinds of names for them, that will treat water, but they still wouldn't do some really basic things you still might need to do if you just grab that water from some source and had it before and tried to use that straw to filter. That straw would get rid of things like metals. It would get rid of organic contaminants. It could probably get rid of some biological elements, viruses, bacteria, so on. But guess what it wouldn't get rid of? It wouldn't get rid of spores that would be stagnant, that could be real common. It wouldn't get rid of and potentially some kinds of bacteria that could be fatal within hours even if you drank that water. So you really need to use a combination of methods. And in this case, you could do 2 things to the water first before you filtered it with that system you either bought or had, and that's to distill it, which means taking it and turning it into air with water vapor in it, and then cooling it and letting the water come back out of it and collecting it. I'm simplifying here, but that process will keep those harmful things out of the water that you now collect that's been cooled. Boiling will do very much the same thing. And so you can boil water. So what does boiling mean? It really means reaching 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees centigrade, which means at elevation, like I'm at, water actually starts to bubble, which we think about as boiling, at a temperature below 100 degrees Fahrenheit or centigrade or 212 degrees Fahrenheit, probably as much as 95 degrees centigrade or maybe as low as 200 degrees. That's not high enough. So you need to be able to measure the temperature in higher elevation locations. I live at 5,600 feet above sea level, and make sure that the water has reached what is called boiling temperature, which is 212 degrees Fahrenheit, 100 degrees Celsius. That's something a lot of people forget about and don't realize, and that happens in the mountains a lot of times when people think they can boil water when they're at 10,000 feet and get rid of some harmful, mainly biological things, and it doesn't end up killing them, and they end up getting some kind of a long-term disease from drinking that water. But if you were to boil it first, and you don't have to boil it for long, literally boil for 60 seconds, let's say, and then let it cool off, then put it through one of these filters that will remove things like organics and metals and so on. That would be it. That would now give you drinkable water. So a myth out there is that these straws, these treatment circumstances you can buy for relatively inexpensive cost now, all different kinds of locations, online or in stores, so on. They're not going to do it for you totally. You will be deceived by that thought. Put in a 1 if that was new knowledge to you, for those out there. That's new news. Water temperature can be important if you're dealing with that second need, which is to keep your body temperature warm. If you drink warm water, which most people don't like to do, I don't like drinking warm water if I can avoid it. I like cold water. But if you drink warm water or warm liquids of other kinds, you can increase that core body temperature. So without necessarily having as much outside heat. So from a shelter perspective or from a fire. How many of you have ever watched in North America, and actually it's worldwide distributed now, and the television show called Survivor? And they leave 20 people usually or more in that range out on an island for 39 days, and they get to the point where one of those people is ultimately chosen. There's voting that goes on as the ultimate survivor. Well, most of what they televise is all the interactions emotionally that go on between people. They don't show, they used to long time ago, the show's been on 20 years, they used to show more of the real survival needs, water, boiling water. Well, if you're in an outdoor situation like that and you need to boil water, what's the first thing you need to do? You have to be able to, Katie, I'll answer that question about iodine tablets in just a second. A great question. How do you boil water if you don't know how to start a fire? And every year it's shocking because you just know that when you watch Survivor that they're going to be required to start a fire. And I don't know why anyone would ever go through the whole interview process and get on that show without learning how to start fire. We will do a very specific and show a hands-on demonstration of how to start fires. And there are lots of different ways, but you need to learn one. You need to be able to learn how to start a fire if you need to. Safely, by the way. You don't want to be able to start a fire that will start a forest fire or something, which in very dry areas, that could happen also. Katie asked, was it iodine tablets that used to be used? Yes, iodine actually could partially serve the needs of what doing the boiling or distilling that I described earlier would do. Not all of them. And that's why iodine isn't used as frequently anymore. And it absolutely would not be used, couldn't be used appropriately to get rid of those organic contaminants, those metals and things that might be there. Things like flint, the mercury and lead that contaminated children in Flint, Michigan, from their drinking water supply. Iodine would not deal with those. And yet it was at one point sort of marketed to people as being the end-all, be-all for getting water clean. It still can be useful, but it would still have to be used with the combination of boiling and, if needed, these organic treatment methods, which usually involve carbon, activated carbon. So what you're doing is you're pulling that water through this material that would be in a straw, some kind of a plastic container, something to bring the water through and remove the metals and the organic materials and so on. Great question, and it was used. Fluoride is still used in municipal water supplies to treat and clean water, and a little bit controversial in some cases. So it's a good time to actually stop for today. If you've got them, throw in any other questions here. We've got 3 minutes before the bottom of the hour. Mark, what are some other thoughts you have about this whole topic of preparedness, and more specifically water? Oh, like pesticides or herbicides, Mark, or organic things that we find a lot more of. That boiling won't get rid of those. So next week we'll finish up on water, and we'll start to move to that next one, which is ways in which you provide body warmth for yourself. So shelter, warming techniques, which we talked a little bit about. That's probably what will take up the time. And I'm going to try to have an expert specifically on the warming side, sheltering side a little bit, to be here. If not next week, then for the week after. So it's been fun. I like this. This is a topic, a broad topic. We're going to cover lots of things. I really think you're going to learn from them. Did get some interaction tonight. That's great. Appreciate that. As always, Mark is amazing. Remember, we have an awesome webinar coming up with Jonathan Latham on Friday, 3 days from now. I'm not going to give the time because it's going to be at various different times. And remember, you don't have to watch these live. We record all of these, and for at least 10 days or so after record them. Anybody who's a member of our community, of which just by signing up for these webinars, you are a member, you can watch the replay for free. Any last thoughts, Mark, or from the audience? All right, you guys are awesome. Mark's got his, you're hearing a little background there from Mark having his, you know. All right, everybody. Been wonderful being with you. Mark, why don't you take us out?